Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second live webinar for EcoFair at the Barn, EcoFair Toronto 2020's Active and Healthy Week. My name is Kim Stemshorn, and I am one of the many volunteers that have been working very hard to put on 16 events for you for the last 3 weeks and one more week to go. Being a virtual event, you may be joining us from the Toronto area or elsewhere in Ontario, Canada, or even internationally, like one of our speakers on this panel. We're so thrilled to expand the scope of EcoFair's audience. If you're interested in obtaining a copy of the transcript of this webinar, please write us at ecofairtoronto@gmail.com. The event you'll enjoy today is, as I mentioned, a part of a 4-week celebration of the start of a Green New Decade. Climate scientists have given us 10 years to turn things around. There are solutions, awesome people, groups, and businesses making amazing progress. So let's all celebrate their achievements with this. Learn about solutions and imagine what we can each do, and perhaps be inspired to take action. We are very excited about today's program and thankful to the organizers and presenters and volunteers that have taken the time to make this happen. And of course, to all of you for joining us today. We'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Indigenous peoples of this land. We are hosting this event today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, we respectfully share this land acknowledgement as a way to recognize the enduring presence and resilience of the Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. We also ask participants to reflect on how we are all accountable to these relationships. Thanks again for joining us. Now let's get started with the program. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Yvonne Bambrick, who is the author of this amazing book. I highly recommend getting your hands on this. And if you registered today, you'll be entered in a contest to possibly win a copy of this. So make sure you register if you haven't. So this is the Urban Cycling Survival Guide. I'll pass it on to Yvonne. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cycling in the Green New Decade, a discussion inspired by the film Bicycle, which is from 2014. It's a fantastic film. I hope that you've seen it. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend checking it out. As Kim recommended my book, which I also highly recommend. Super handy for newer riders. And even if you've been at it for a while, there's a lot to learn about cycling in an urban context, just for practical getting around and recreational purposes. Anyway, I'm super stoked to be here with you today. And I don't know how many cyclists we have with us, but I am definitely a year-round cyclist and I'm getting ready for the winter. I'm not totally ready for snow yet, but it'll happen and we'll manage. We always do. I guess I will kick off by introducing our first speaker, and that's Michael Longfield from Cycle Toronto. Michael Longfield is the interim executive director, at Cycle Toronto, and is passionate about bicycles as machines for recreation and transportation. And here he comes.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think it's fitting that you're passing off to me, given you started Cycle Toronto back when it was the bike union. So thank you.
You're most welcome.
So my name is Michael Longfield, and like Yvonne said, I'm the interim executive director of Cycle Toronto. And I'm really honored and excited to be here to talk about cycling and riding a bike, both in the present and hopefully in our green new decade. And, I think one of the things, given this current moment, we've all known that riding a bike can be a safe, efficient way to get around while maintaining physical distancing. It's a great way to get exercise for physical and mental health. And I think we're seeing that both in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the looming climate crisis, that the bicycle is a 19th century solution to our 21st century problems. Since the pandemic has continued into the spring, summer, and now fall, we're seeing more people discovering or rediscovering riding a bike. And sort of reminds me of a study I heard before the pandemic. They were asking commuters about their mode of transportation, and they were giving people the option, if you would stick with your regular mode of commuting, or have the option to teleport, what would you choose? And they found that, maybe not surprising, 75% who drive and 65% of people who take transit would choose teleportation over their current method of commuting. But that was compared to 66% of people who bike who would choose to keep biking. And so even if you gave them the option to teleport, they would choose to keep biking. And the percentage of people who walk to work would rather do that as well. And I think the more we can help spread that message and really show that riding a bike is a normal thing to do, provided you build safe infrastructure and you create systems and support to make it happen, can just make it more accessible to more people. And in the city of Toronto, we're seeing a lot of really important historic changes just to make riding a bike a more appealing thing to do, a safer thing to do, and really hope we can take this momentum and not only just make Toronto a better cycling city for all, but just a more livable city. And I think those important first steps will just help deal with this looming climate crisis. So thanks again for being here, or for inviting me, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Michael. We'll have a chance to discuss later, which is excellent because I think we'll have lots to speak about. We'll move on to Ed Mark. Ed is an avid cyclist and bike mechanic for the past 25 years. It's a great skill set to have. Ed is currently the manager at Gateway Bicycle Hub and is in charge of program development, including bicycle repair and refurbishment, cycling safety, cycling skills, and an advocate for safer cycling infrastructure in the Flemington and Thorncliffe neighborhoods. Here you go, Ed. Thanks.
Thanks, Yvonne. Again, my name's Ed Mark, and yes, I'm the manager of the Gateway Bike Hub. Gateway Bike Hub is a special program. It's funded by the City of Toronto's Solid Waste Division, and we fall under the umbrella of the Community Reduce and Reuse program. So also anything to do with repairing and fixing. So our mandate is to help people sustain their lifestyle of biking by teaching them how to maintain them. Repair, we tried to encourage tips and techniques that would repair and fix and maintain rather than replace and discard. So all of our programs are free. So we have a drop-in do-it-yourself program where people can come in, just the general public. All our programs are free. They can come in and work on their own bike. We would teach them how to maintain, give them little techniques that could prolong the life of their bike. And we would minimize any kind of throwing away. So an interesting statistic, last year, we've been in existence for a year and a half, and there's 3 city-funded bike hubs in Toronto, and we're the youngest one. Last year, we diverted almost 6,000 pounds of waste from landfill, and that is because we also refurbished a lot of bikes. We find a lot of people that find out about us, they'll donate bikes. The city will direct us to abandoned bikes left throughout the city, and we would take them and we would refurbish them and we would give them back to those who need them. So in the areas that we work in, like Thorncliffe and Flemington, it's a very high need area. And last year we gave away, through our Earn a Bike programs and also giveaways, probably close to 300 bikes. So that means these bikes that would be normally thrown away, they would be given to people that need them. So we're constantly refurbishing, restoring. One of the things that I've noticed at Gateway in terms of cycling, our programs are evolving. So it's not just about teaching people how to maintain bikes, but we find that a lot of people in the community are not confident or possess the skills, and they are afraid of riding their bikes on the streets. So a lot of our programs have evolved to learning certain skills, how safety on the street, and just basic handling skills, how to handle their bike. So a lot of people in the community don't know how to ride a bike, we found, and we want to teach that. So I have a great time. I meet lots of great people, and it's super important that we're there, and we get to help people kind of maintain their lifestyle. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Kim, or sorry, Yvonne.
Thanks so much, Ed. That's 300 bikes to community. That's pretty nice. It's a good thing we've got programs like yours in all parts of this, well, most parts of the city, because they really are so important. I'll move on to introduce Dave Shellnutt. Dave is a personal injury lawyer specializing in bike crashes, sexual assaults, police violence, and racism. Dave also founded the Bike Brigade as a response to COVID-19, which provides free delivery service for organizations and individuals in need. And it's been super popular, very effective, and such a great crew of cyclists just fanning out across the city to help out. So here you go, Dave. You're up next.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and thanks, EcoFair, for having me. And the other speakers, I, like Yvonne, am super stoked to hear about you all and all the cool things you're doing in cycling. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, and hopefully that works okay. Okay, I'm assuming that worked. So my day job is I am a lawyer, and I specialize in helping injured cyclists, survivors of sexual assault, and people who've experienced police violence and racism. I prioritize, in addition to just providing individual legal work, in systemic change, and that means making cyclists aware of their rights, and advocating for changes to policy that are negatively affecting cyclists, like how police handle dooring cases. I write a ton about this stuff on my blog, so check that out. There's good know your rights stuff, and things to get you educated on what to do if the unfortunate happens. But I don't want to talk too much about my day job, because that's not as exciting as the stuff that we've been doing with the Bike Brigade. And so far, right now, that is about 600 registered cyclist volunteers who across Toronto, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, have been delivering anything from DIY masks, prescriptions, and groceries around the city of Toronto to folks in need. Our goal was to safely head out and deliver things to people who should stay home and stay out of the hospitals. To date, we've done 2,000 food boxes for Bikeshare Toronto. We did about $16,000 in grocery deliveries for Parkdale People's Economy, hundreds of masks, and things like that. We do hundreds of deliveries a week. Next week, I'm doing a muffin run from a company who's donating extra muffins to a local shelter for the Toronto Drop-In Network. So we're doing that stuff through the pandemic and forward. And we really wanted to showcase how cyclists care about their communities. We ride bikes because it's healthy and it's better for everybody. So the Bike Brigade is a perfect example of that, of cyclists who care about their community, and when it's in need, like during the pandemic, really giving back. But we're going to push forward past the pandemic and continue to do the Bike Brigade. We've recently partnered with 12 Donations, and that is a group that provides free menstrual products to folks in need across the city. And part of them reducing their environmental footprint was engaging the Bike Brigade to deliver these packages by bicycle. We've also supported movements in Indigenous communities and Black communities calling for alternatives to policing and defunding the police. So people on bikes have been going and standing and helping keep folks safe as they exercise their constitutional right to protest. We help direct traffic, and we just provide an alternative to police. It's really, really great work. And something that we're passionate about, and something that cyclists can do to assist these movements that we've seen all summer. Yeah, that's essentially what we've been doing. We've been busy. We want to push back against the narrative that so often has come about that there's a war on cars and that cyclists are all a gang of rule-breaking degenerates, when in actuality we're people who live in the community that care about it, care about the environment and things like that. So that's the whole goal of the Bike Brigade, and I've been happy to help found it and to continue organizing it. We would love it if you folks would join us. There's a picture of the team there. This day we did about 200 meals from a restaurant in Kensington out to Scarborough. So join us. We could use the help, especially in the winter months. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's been amazing watching the Bike Brigade develop and really turn into an essential service, really. So thank you to you and all the volunteers from the Bike Brigade. I will move on to Alyssa Kransberg, who is from Bikeshare Toronto. And I have to say, just a little anecdote, I was so pleased that we managed to get Bikeshare Toronto in the city in the first place. And I was part of the group, which is now Cycle Toronto, that really pushed hard to get it here, and it has blossomed. We hung on by the skin of our teeth to get it implemented with 1,000 bikes and 90 stations, I think. And now we have 625 stations and 6,850 bikes across the city. So Lisa works with the Toronto Parking Authority as a senior planner for the Bikeshare Toronto program. She's responsible for the planning and management of the Bikeshare program and has led the last 5-year expansion of the system. It's now in 20 of the city's 25 wards, and Alyssa is involved in the long-term planning initiatives and led the launch of pilot programs in North York and Scarborough, which are suburbs of Toronto, and introduced pedal assist electric bikes to the fleet this year, which is super exciting. Alyssa, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction and for EcoFair for having me. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully show you more about Bikeshare Toronto. So let's go to the next slide. Ooh. There you go. So Bikeshare Toronto is a City of Toronto service that makes bikes available to the public, and it really functions as an extension of the public transit system, trying to get people to and from their destination in a healthy and fun and safe way, and of course, environmentally friendly. And if you're interested in trying and you've seen stations or bikes around the city, you can approach a station, or you can go online or download the PBSC app to try out the system. And as Yvonne mentioned, in 2011, the program was introduced to the City of Toronto with 80 stations and 1,000 bicycles. And today, we're happy to have expanded it by 680% in the past 5 years. And that's really been my main job, leading the planning of the expansion and installing more stations across the city, expanding the service area and making these publicly accessible bikes accessible to more Torontonians. We also launched a pilot in North York and Scarborough in more suburban areas to try and grow the program outside of just what people think of as the cycling area, which is the downtown core. It's really meant for all Torontonians around the city. And this year, excitingly, we also introduced e-bikes. And so these are pedal assist bicycles that offer a little bit of a boost to help people who maybe aren't as comfortable on a bike or have trouble going up the hill. There are definitely hills in Toronto, even though it is kind of flat in some areas. So there are 300 bikes across the city. And if you open the Bikeshare map online, you can see the little bolts of lightning where we have the pedal assist bikes available. So it's a really exciting time to be part of the Toronto Parking Authority and Bikeshare team. We've seen such huge growth in the system, but that's also been paired with huge growth in ridership. And we have some great data that shows how much ridership has increased and how people are really looking for bikes and an opportunity to cycle around the city. And I'm sure you've heard that bike sales are at an all-time high, and it's really hard to find a bike in the city. And we've seen very similar numbers in Bikeshare, where even throughout the pandemic and difficult times, we're seeing that people are really trying to get outside, trying to find different things to do around the city and trying to travel around the city in a healthy way. So we've seen continued growth since 2016 when the program has started to grow in size, and we're hoping to see almost 3 million trips this year. We still have 2 months left in the year, so we still have plenty of time to collect more rides and generate more rides across Toronto. And of course, for EcoFair, I did want to mention something about sustainability. So Bikeshare is a healthy way and a safe way to travel across the city on a bicycle. But we are really committed also to an environmentally friendly way of operating. So if you've seen the Bikeshare stations, you may have noticed that there's a solar panel. So all of the stations are actually solar powered. So they're not connected to the grid. They can function in a blackout anytime that the power is down. The other thing that is really interesting about the program is that the bicycles have been on the road since 2011 when the program was introduced. And it's really important to us, just as Ed was talking about, to divert waste and not throw the bicycles out. And so what we do is we have a very rigorous maintenance program where the bikes are repaired constantly and parts are replaced as needed, but we don't want to ever throw out the aluminum frame and have to buy a new one and put one into the garbage. So there is a very rigorous program to keep the bikes on the road and sustainable in a sustainable fashion. To be able to have not only a good and safe and quick way to travel around the city, but to make sure that it is meeting our environmental goals. So that's all I have for today. Please ask any questions as they come up. Happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Alyssa. I love our bike share program. It's just so exciting. And it's so wonderful to see so many people using it across the city, and the expansion finally to, well, at least a pilot project into some of our suburbs is even better. I will move on to our special guest, Michael B. Clifford. He's a BAFTA award-winning film director and educator working in drama and documentary. His latest film, number 3, recently premiered on The Fastest Bicycle in the World, is currently in production. He is he is passionate about developing new low and zero carbon production methods. That's excellent. He's based in Warwickshire, working all over the world and celebrating 30 years in film. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. And greetings from the UK, from England. Great, I've just got a message that you can hear me. So I thought that I would perhaps just talk a little bit about, there's so many subjects that have already come up and so much we could talk about, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about why I made the film. I pitched the idea of making a film about cycling to the BBC and to other broadcasters, but they just weren't interested. But in the last 10 years, there's been quite an upsurge in interest in cycling in the UK, which was sparked partly by the sporting success at the Olympic Games, but also there's been a change on the streets as well. So it felt like the right time. But when I said to people when I was starting this project that I was making a film about cycling, they'd say, oh, so you're making a film about doping then? Or they'd say, oh, it's about road rage. And I thought, do you know what? There's a lot more to cycling than that. And I thought, well, those subjects have been covered elsewhere. So what I ended up making was a film that somebody described as a love letter to cycling, and I think that's quite a good description, really. I learned a lot making the film, particularly the history of transport policy in the UK really enlightened me as to, you know, when you're out there on the streets, it really informed me as to why it's not, or, you know, hasn't been a great place to ride a bike in recent times. And it was really interesting making the film, and excited me that a storyline about building a cycle path was as engaging for audiences as making a film about winning gold medals. So that was really exciting. Because ultimately, you know, I'm a commuter, and that's really where my interest lies, and where, you know, I'm keen to see the greatest change. So after I made the film, I actually gave up car ownership, which was much easier than I thought it would be, despite having a family. And recently, as mentioned in the introduction, I've been exploring how to make films in a zero carbon way. I've made more films about cycling since Bicycle, and I'm currently making one that has a Toronto connection, which is about an attempt to build the fastest bicycle in the world, because Toronto University are actually the current world record holders at 89 miles an hour. The film that I'm making, called The Fastest Bicycle in the World, is due out in 2022. And if you'd like to get more information about that, please go to my website, which is michaelbclifford.co.uk. I think that's all from me. But like I say, this is there's so many things we could talk about here. Please do ask me questions about the film, or I'd love to talk endlessly about cycling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That makes 2 or maybe 5 of us, all of us on the panel today, that could speak endlessly about cycling, or 6 of us, I guess. Thank you so much for your remarks and for joining us today. We're going to open it up to a discussion. So I'm gone. I don't know where I went. Anyway, I'm still here. I think you can still hear me. There we go. I'm back. You guys can see me again? Thanks. So I think we're going to, I think, Michael, maybe you can, I'm not sure if we're all going to be having our videos on now, or are we all, anyway, I'm not sure. All good. But we are going to open it up to Q&A. You should all turn your videos on. There we go. Okay. Hi, guys. These things, they work. We just have to, move along together and sort them out. So look at these amazing people. I mean, we're all totally into bikes, which of course makes me happy. I will talk endlessly about bicycles, although I have to say, and maybe some of you who've been at this for a while might feel the same, but I get really tired of repeating myself. It's amazing how many times you have to say, yes, bicycles are great for the environment. They're the original zero emissions vehicle. And yes, they're great for your physical and mental health. And yes, we should be making space for them, adequate, safer spaces on our roadways in urban and suburban and rural contexts. These are all good for everybody. It's not just good for bikes. But how many times do we have to say these things before we actually move ahead? It takes a lot of repetition and it's exhausting. But then along comes a pandemic and woo! We got action. So I don't know about you, Michael, but in Toronto, we had a lot more rapid movement when it came to putting in place infrastructure. And that was to accommodate folks who were working from home, had more time to be out recreationally, getting physical activity with our gyms closed. Was that something similar that you noticed in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, certainly during the first lockdown, it was really quite beautiful just to sit on my front step and watch families go by on their bikes. It was really remarkable and just so quiet. It was a bit sad that got rolled back very quickly though, once things started to ease up. But I think that there is certainly an awareness with authorities in city councils and so on to really try and press on, although it's difficult for them as well, really try to make whatever gains they can,
Yeah, the political will component is tricky because you always need to rely on those who voted you in to continue to support you, and you need public will and public interest in order to do that, which is why organizations like Cycle Toronto are so important, in that they're membership driven and they represent a large number of people and can mobilize people at their various neighborhood and ward. Well, that's our system here municipally. Michael, how was membership grown or changed over the pandemic so far?
Our membership numbers have actually been fairly steady. I think one of the things that we're seeing is there are definitely more people out riding bikes now, and especially downtown. Although I'm sure Ed's also seeing people riding more bikes up at Thorncliffe and Flemington as well. And some of the new bike lanes that have come in this summer, the City of Toronto's put in 40 new kilometers, about 40, not quite 40 yet. We're going to try to get overly for you, Mark, for Thorncliffe and Flemington. But we're just seeing more people riding bikes. And I think for right now, people are really excited they're there. And what we're trying to do is really raise awareness that a lot of these bike lanes are technically temporary. Some of them look better and more robust than our existing bike lanes. I think that speaks to a lot of the rather poor state of Toronto's cycling infrastructure prior to the pandemic. But a lot of these bike lanes are temporary. And now we're trying to bring awareness that they are temporary. We do need support. And if we want to make meaningful change in an equitable way outside the downtown core, we're going to have to do more than just, our major downtown arterials like Bloor and Danforth. And it's exciting that there's a study on Yonge Street coming, which seemed impossible a year ago. But there's still lots of other corners in the city that need active transportation as well. Across Toronto, we all know that one third of all trips are like less than 5 kilometers. And so that's really easily bikeable if you have a protected way to do it. And one of the things we're seeing as well during the pandemic, and actually I'd be curious to Alyssa, if you're sort of seeing this data with Bikeshare, is people are doing more local trips. The people that are, have the luxury, let's say, of not having to commute to work, who are maybe able to work from home, are living and shopping more locally now. And a bike's a great way to get around, to go get takeout, to, go visit a friend, to, go down and really just sort of experience your neighborhood, the types of trips that the Bike Brigade is doing is exactly that sort of thing as well. And really making sure that communities are connected to themselves and that people within those communities can choose to ride a bike, I think is really essential in the coming weeks and months as we continue to build out this network.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think of bicycles as time machines. You really, now that traffic's back, sadly, motor vehicle traffic that is, and bike traffic was always kind of there. But we did kind of have the space to ourselves for a while, but still, bicycles can get you across town pretty much faster than any other mode. So that's one of my favorite references to the bicycle is that it's a time machine, it's a time saver, and it's a joy, obviously, as well. Speaking of time, what's the average in terms of bike share, Alyssa? I'm wondering, what are you noticing in terms of number of trips and just the time that people are spending on the bikes?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we do have a great amount of data about bike share. We are able to see origin and destination data. It's actually all posted on the city's open data site, if anyone's interested in looking. And we just recently updated it with the 2019 and 2020 year-to-date data. So I guess comparing, I would say, a regular year, 2019 to 2020, typically Bikeshare generates really short one-way trips. They're meant for commuter trips to and from home, to work, or to and from transit, connecting people as a first last mile solution. This year has been a little bit different. We are seeing more what we would call recreational trips, trips that are no longer going just to and from Union Station, maybe trips more along the active TO routes or along the existing bike infrastructure. So we are seeing trips are a little bit longer than usual because maybe instead of just going to and from destination, trying to get to work on time or trying to get home after work, people are traveling around their neighborhoods or riding a bike to check out new neighborhoods in the city, just as a way to get a little bit farther than how you can get on foot. So I really encourage people to look at the data if they have time or if they're interested in that kind of stuff.
That's great. I'm not surprised that that's what you had to say. Just anecdotally watching people riding, it seemed like that's what was happening, and just there's fewer people going into workplaces, so it makes a lot of sense. Ed, what kind of ridership have you seen in your necks of the woods there? Any changes?
Yeah, during the pandemic, obviously we've been swamped with all kinds of bikers. Primarily we serve youth, so between 14 and 19 years old. That was the main clientele that would come in, but we're seeing a lot more seniors who, who are a little wary of transit, maybe, and they want to pull out the old dusty bike that they've had for like 40 years, and yeah, we've been helping. We've been actually working with Flemington Health Center. They have a seniors program, so we've been doing like education with seniors and how not just bike maintenance, but also road cycling skills and just refreshers. We encounter we work with a lot of public schools too, and also Mark Arnault Collegiate, and we found astonishingly a lot of the cultures. The schools have 80 different spoken languages, so it's incredibly diverse, and we find that a lot of women have been coming out more. So I would say women in a lot of the cultures, especially in Flemington and Thorncliffe, are generally from the Middle East or in cultures that don't encourage cycling, and especially affects women. And so we find a lot of the older women, like mothers, would come out and they would want to learn more about cycling. So we've done learn to rides and bike mechanics with them. So they are getting more confident. So definitely a shift. So it's been really good to see.
That is fabulous news. That makes me very happy to hear.
Yeah.
And it comes down to having the choice to do that, right? Having the choice to ride a bicycle or to learn to ride a bike if previously that choice was not available to you. And that reminds me, Michael Clifford, one of the counselor from Birmingham, that said, travel can be nice rather than that part of the day you just have to put up with. The bike can do that. It can make travel nice. It can provide you with a nice choice for getting from A to B. So I really just enjoyed that line. There's so many lines that I took notes from in the film, and it was such really. I additionally wrote down that it's a love letter to the bicycle. So it was amused to hear you say that somebody else. It just makes, that's really what the film is about. And for us bicycle lovers, it's very happy making. It's a lovely film, and I really enjoyed it. Talk to me about what you think about the choice and that argument. Like, is it enough? I'm always looking for new ways to convince people that this is a good idea. And it really does come down to choice. It's not a political left or right issue. It's about transportation choices in an urban context where we all have different types of things to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it is very difficult. I think that, and I have been thinking about this quite a bit recently, and I think it is a lot to do with fear, people's fear around the safety of cycling. And I think ultimately, do you know what, they do have a point. And cities and towns do need to be safer for cyclists ultimately. And that is going to be key. And that's really where we need to be pushing, I think. That's what I'd most like to see. But in terms of convincing people, I think that really it is, it just does. I guess when you're on the inside, it just does feel so obvious, doesn't it? What the benefits are. That the smallest. I mean, I've been out tonight. Since the pandemic, I've been doing some part-time work, doing delivery work, which is on my bike. And, I've been able to just experience Halloween just by riding around town and seeing everybody enjoying themselves and seeing the moon out. And you just wouldn't experience any of that if you were in a car. So just, working is fantastic, and going to work and riding back from work is a great experience because you just see all these things along the way. So when I was watching the film again today, I picked up on that line again, and I just thought, that is just so right and such a beautiful thing that riding to work is not just a better experience, but a great experience.
Yeah, agreed. And you bring up another point. I mean, it's one thing to be riding to work or to school, but it's another thing to ride for work. We have such an explosion of working cyclists. We've always had our courier community, but now we have the bike brigade, they're volunteers, but they're on their bikes as part of the work that they're doing for community, or that people are doing, food delivery apps, and the proliferation of people working on their bicycles, police on bicycles as well. I wonder, is there something more that we can do when it comes to protecting people who have to work on bicycles? And is that one of the ways we can increase the likelihood that councils across Canada and in Toronto, obviously, will begin to really take seriously the need to adapt our roadways to make these places safe workplaces?
Yeah.
Anyone have thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the key things I think is liability and responsibility. So as I'm sure you're aware, in places like Holland and the Netherlands and Denmark, there's a much bigger use of cycling day to day. Everybody rides a bike basically. But in other European countries, you have something called presumed liability, so that the strongest, if you like, have the responsibility in any situation. So if a car hits a bike, then it's assumed that it was the car's fault. And we don't have that situation in the UK at the moment. But that would do a lot to change. But things are always, things are always inching forward, if you like. And just this week, I filled in a questionnaire for the highway code, which every driver needs to read before they get their license to drive a car. And in it said that they were making changes to it so that those who can cause the greatest damage will take the greatest responsibility in any situation. So that language was, I just felt, it's beginning to recognize that those who can cause the greatest damage can bear the greatest responsibility.
As it should be.
That's just automatic,
Mm-hmm.
So the highway code isn't, it's not the law, it's a guide, isn't it, ultimately? But if that, I just thought if that is beginning to use that kind of language, then we are hopefully heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, we've got all kinds of changes to make at all the various levels. I'm just checking out our questions from the audience here. I have a question for Dave Shellnutt. As the biking lawyer, what are the most common issues you encounter? And also, Dave, if you had other thoughts on what we were just talking about, please feel free to add those as well.
Sure, thanks so much. Actually, Michael, in Ontario, we have the reverse onus, which means that in a civil context, if you hit a cyclist or pedestrian in a car, you're assumed to be at fault. So similar to, I guess, the Netherlands, though the application of offenses by police for dangerous driving are poorly enforced. And so you may, in the civil context, have success, but quite often we see drivers unfortunately kill and maim people and get off with a minor slap on the wrist. It's something we're changing or trying to change in the advocacy sector. What was the question then again, Yvonne? Sorry about that. My mind was on liability. Classic lawyer.
Yeah, fair enough, as it should be. The question was, what are the most common issues you encounter as the biking lawyer?
Sure. Number one is that we just as cyclists simply don't know our rights. We don't know all the things that are available to us if the unfortunate happens. And so it's really good to just, if you're out there riding, know what to do if something bad happens. I myself have been hit in a bike lane, and I didn't do everything right. So then after that, I researched it and figured and wrote a guide about how to properly act. You're holding up something, but I can't see it.
I'm holding up Michael Longfield from Cycle Toronto. This is the membership card. When you're a member of Cycle Toronto, you get a card that gives you discounts, but it also, to your point, David, it has on the back of it, I don't know if you can see that, it says, you know, the details in case of collision with a motor vehicle. Get the license plate and photos, right? Most of us have a phone in our pockets that has a camera. Get witnesses, get their information, call 911, accept medical attention, and seek legal advice. That can be through Cycle Toronto or through folks like yourself. So, you know, having a little bit of information goes a long way, because adrenaline, if something does happen, most people get embarrassed and they want to just get out of the way and get out of the situation. And people don't realize until quite a bit later that maybe something's happened to their bike or to themselves. And so, you know, having good advice and sharing information as you do and as Cycle Toronto does is so important.
You're totally right. Just to add a quick point there, you're in shock. I biked home with a broken wrist. Thankfully, I took pictures, but so did he later after he had cleaned the markings off his car. So take pictures and get medical attention. It's really important.
Ouch. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. So look out for yourself, really. And witnesses are so important as well. The other thing, just while we're on this, because, you know, collisions happen, and you also, you know, you can trip and fall just walking around in the winter or whenever. So it's not that cycling is so dangerous, but, you know, things happen, right? Things happen in life. And when you're on a certain mode, there are certain things you ought to do to help yourself. What was my point? I got sidetracked. Oh, geez. Anyway, no matter. Take care of yourself. Don't run away. Get the photos. Ask for witnesses. Oh, that was it. Police. It's tricky. And I don't know, Michael Clifford, if this is something that you notice where you are, but often enough in Toronto, our police service are not great at responding or knowing what to do when there is a bike on car or bike on bike collision or some kind of a problem in the roadway. They rarely file the right report or know what report to file, or, you know, there's this bias towards drivers as well, which is an ongoing issue. Is that something that you notice?
Yeah, I think that that there is a bias towards drivers. However, there are cases of individual police forces where they've been very positive. So the West Midlands Police Force, which is the city of Birmingham, comes under West Midlands Police, they've actually been very positive, and they've initiated schemes where they've encouraged safe passing distances and actually monitored motorists and watched them, and then, you know, if they're passing too close, they've then picked them up and said, do you realize what you were doing, and tried to educate them. They've also taken action around other things that are not so much related to cyclists, but pedestrians when it comes to parking habits and things like that. So making things better for pedestrians. So they've actually been very, very positive and very good. And I think one of a great example to other police forces, but it is a regional thing, you know, that they're doing it, but elsewhere, maybe, you know, things are just the same old, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Michael, while we're on this, and then I have a question for Mark from the audience. Michael Longfield, I should say. Have you had much success in terms of Cycle Toronto engaging with Toronto Police lately and kind of trying to help bring them on side?
That's a great question. One of the things that we're definitely seeing, not just with Cycle Toronto, but I think with a lot of North American cycling advocacy spaces that are sort of, you know, let's be honest, they're traditionally white and male. there's a lot of rethinking around the role of enforcement. I think 10 years ago we all thought like, yeah, we just need to ticket more drivers and have more crackdowns and have more blitzes, and that'll make our streets safer. And we're realizing it's not making streets safer. In fact, for many people, it's making them much less safe. Mm-hmm. And so, really rethinking those relationships with police is, I think, really important. It'd be, I think it'd be taking, for lack of a better word, I think it'd be taking this moment for granted that we have the time to pause and seriously think about this. We're encouraged in the short term around the role of automated speed enforcement. Again, potentially lots of problematic ways it could be rolled out. If they're put in racialized areas where people may not, to sort of target particular neighborhoods or that sort of thing, there are definitely ways in which it can be rolled out. That's not great, but I think definitely has the potential to remove a lot of human bias around things, while the ultimate goal is just to improve infrastructure. The safest way to make it safe and easy to ride a bike is just to have protected bike lanes, or to have multi-use paths that are well maintained and well lit, and to just further let politicians know that people who live in their wards, local residents, care about riding a bike. And that it is I think there was a line in Michael's documentary that Yvonne, you and I were talking about. It was maybe Carlton Reed who was saying, that it's not just for weirdos. And
yeah, cycling's not just for weirdos anymore.
Yeah, not just for weirdos anymore. And I think we're seeing that this summer, and I think it's just really important not to take this moment for granted, that it's just going to keep on going this way, that it's going to require a lot of political will, a lot of heavy lifting, and making new allies to make this the new reality.
Thank you so much, Michael. And you brought up a great point. I was really thinking about the bias when it comes to drivers and reporting around collisions, but a great point about the fraughtness of policing and people on bikes, people of color that are rarely treated fairly. So I appreciate you bringing that into the discussion. I have the question from the audience for Ed. The question is, I'm a downtown person. How can we better support cycling in other areas of the city, even the Thorncliffe and Flemington neighborhood?
I guess from my perspective, thanks for the question. That's a good question. If you mean by support in terms of helping people in need, I guess you could donate anything that you're not using. So if you find, we get lots of bicycles that have been abandoned near dumpsters, bikes that are not locked up properly or just get thrown around. We see them along the ravines, along bike paths and stuff. So from my point of view, you would be helping someone get a bike regardless of what it is, or parts or anything, clothing, accessories, water bottles, anything that you think you're not using, and you can bring it to any bike hub really. And there are other bike collectives that we work with that aren't City of Toronto related, like Charlie's Free Wheels or Bike Pirates. They're all around the city. Just bring something and it'll help someone else, because we always find a home for any kind of part or bicycle. So that's definitely one way that everyone can help.
Right on. Thank you, Ed. And I was going to say, Michael Longfield might have a thing to say about that, about the ward advocacy program.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as a good example, though, and talking about the Toronto context and the nearly 40 kilometers of new bike lanes that came in this summer, I say nearly because there's one project that's still pending that was council approved, but still hasn't been put in the ground yet, and that is the bike lanes that were proposed on Overley Boulevard, which would do a really essential job to connect to communities, the Thorncliffe community and the Flemington Park communities, with a bike lane to be able to go back and forth there, because there's currently no other way to go there. And I think that's an important thing for people who are downtown to realize is for lack of a better word, it sounds terrible to say, but we got lucky this pandemic. There was, there were ward groups, there were dedicated volunteers, there were a lot of loud voices to make sure their local politicians heard that cycling was a priority for them. And when there was political will to do it and capacity to deliver, we got bike lanes on Bloor and Danforth and University, and really sort of made riding a bike in downtown Toronto much less terrible than it used to be. But a pocket like Overley, we're still waiting on. And so, making sure that, politicians know that, projects like Overley really matter to them, and ensuring that this expansion, continues outside the core as well. It's just crucial.
Great point. And on that note, in terms of expanding our network, but also just accessible, I'm trying to make a jump here to a question for Alyssa. With the introduction of electric bikes as part of the Bikeshare network, that really does give people a bit more distance capacity. How many electric bikes do we have altogether?
Yeah, so right now we have a pilot with 300 e-bikes. So for those who haven't seen the e-bikes, they're pedal assist e-bikes. So you do have to pedal. There is still an active component to it. You have to pedal to be able to turn on the, electric part of the bike. They're not really those big electric scooters where you just sit and ride. You do have to be active on them. So there are 300 around the city. You can find them at any one of the 625 stations, and you can bring them to any of the stations in the network. That means you can take one from the Scarborough pilot, bring it downtown, or vice versa. So right now we're testing them out to see, one, what their environmental impact is, two, what ridership is like, and just to follow the patterns and see what kind of changes we would have to make operationally to operate a larger fleet of them, because we know there's a huge new push for e-bikes around North America and around the world, or whether it's e-cargo bikes or just e-bikes in general, to introduce bikes to people who may not want to travel longer than 5 kilometers on a regular pedal bike. And so there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the e-bike world to try and get more people cycling in a new, fun way, and in an easier way for people who may be a little bit afraid to try and jump on a bike for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And I guess imagine we're also looking at these in terms of a winter context, because our program is a year-round bike share program, unlike other cities where they come off the road for the winter. So I guess this is the first winter of e-bikes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have to continue studying them and see how they perform in the winter, just to make sure that not only are they safe, but that the batteries stay charged. There are lots of different factors that we're going to study into the colder months.
And on that note, e-bikes and batteries and replacements, and we're here at EcoFair Toronto, battery technology is something, we have to think about, the lifespan of these things. And you've mentioned trying to keep the bikes on, in the network for as long as possible. What's the strategy for batteries?
That's a great question. That's really part of the pilot and what we're trying to study. I did mention in my presentation that lifespan of our bikes is something that's really important. We don't want to be throwing out any aluminum frames unless they're damaged, of course. And we see our partners or other cities like Montreal, who has Bixi Montreal, and London, who have very strong, large bike share programs, are seeing very similar things, where the bike lifespan is actually much longer than anyone thought. Our bikes are actually built in Canada, which is great. And we're continuing to study how long these bikes can last on the street. And for electric bikes, it is a little bit different with the battery lifespan. Right now, we have bikes that are approaching 10 years old. We don't think that batteries will last that long. So it's one thing that we definitely need to assess moving forward, is what is the environmental impact of it, because we still want to be a low carbon emission way to travel. And if that's impacted because of batteries, we'll have to assess that once all the research is in.
There she is. Hi. Thank you, Alyssa. That's great. Great to hear. I'm going to another question, and I'm putting two questions together because they kind of go together. So here we go. Classic question. What is being done about cyclists racing on sidewalks and making it dangerous for pedestrians? I've often been really startled to have someone rush by without using bike bells. And I'm going to carry this along to how can we make cycling more accessible to everyone in Toronto, because I think those things go together. Generally, people on sidewalks are riding there because they don't feel safe or welcome on the road. So hand up, who wants to take this one first? There's Michael Longfield. Okay, you're up.
Yeah, I would be remiss not to answer this. I think, like you said, Yvonne, it does sort of suggest the one of the core issues here is, in a city like Toronto, when we look at our roadways, we're all fighting for space, and we're fighting for space in a system that's been designed to prioritize the fast movement of cars. And so, we all know incidents and collisions with cars are considerably more deadly, more dangerous than those with bicycles. But with bicycles, there are also concerns as well. And so really the key thing here is to keep putting pressure on to make sure that we're creating space for people to safely walk, to safely ride their bicycles, and then still where there's still room and it makes sense for cars to be able to flow as well. And I think one of the things as well, especially with a lot of these incidents that happen in the suburbs, in those situations, they're not just streets where people are the cars are maybe traveling, 30, 40 kilometers an hour. They're major arterials where cars are traveling 50, 60, 70, 80. And even if they're not the speed limit is an 80, the data we're seeing from the automated speed enforcement cameras are very clearly often that high. And people are trying to be safe. And I think across everywhere, people just want to get from to where they go, from where they started to where they go, and they want to be safe. And I think the more we can stress that riding a bike is a safe way to move around, and that create safe space for them on the roads, the less we'll have those types of those fears and incidents on our sidewalks. I think actually, sorry, I was just thinking Carlton Reid is featured a lot in Michael Clifford's documentary, and I think in one of his articles he showed that when you compare it to like the Netherlands, say for instance, when you put in good infrastructure, incidents of cyclists blowing through stop signs or red lights or riding on the sidewalk goes down dramatically. Right. And I think we'll see that in Toronto as well. I think once people get used to this infrastructure, as they start using it more, I think we're going to see behavior across all modes of transportation just get better.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I have to say, another one of the positives, I think it's a positive, of the pandemic is people's increased spatial awareness, how close they are to others in our public realm, which it's a thing. I've really noticed it. I'm not sure it will necessarily translate into when you're in your car bubble, because you really do get disconnected. But when you're in a connected public space, anyway, that doesn't really help a bike just blew past me while I'm walking down the street. It's not great. It's not behavior that anybody really likes. But again, it's all about infrastructure, and it comes down to political will and public support. So if it's something that matters to you, and really, as I think we've said already, bike infrastructure serves everyone, whether you're riding a bike or not, right? It makes for a safer sidewalk environment. It makes for a more predictable roadway environment, right? So I know a lot of drivers that are petrified of hitting someone on a bike. Mm-hmm. When you put in a bike lane, particularly a separated cycle track, you're reducing the likelihood of an error occurring where there's an injury as a result. So it's all about talking to your counselors, making sure you send an email or make a quick phone call to say that, I live in your neighborhood and you're in your ward, and bike infrastructure matters to me. One of the things, just quickly, I was reminded, Michael, at the end of your film, and this just comes back down to the basics of how wonderful bicycles are and how universal that joy can be. The last scene with your daughter, Carmina, I think, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. She finally learns to ride on her own, and you can see the joy, and she's so thrilled. She's jumping up and down, and it's just, the bicycle does that. All the other things we've talked about, right? The problems, but ultimately bicycles are this freedom machine, and they allow you to have this incredible mobility. You can go anywhere on a bike, safely in some cases, less safely in others, but right, it's still ultimately this incredible vehicle. How is your daughter doing on her bicycle these days, Michael?
I'm afraid to say that she's a typical 12-year-old and rebelling against her parents, and because I'm into bikes, she's not into bikes.
No.
Yeah,
She'll come
but
around.
hopefully it'll be one of those things that she will have planted the seed, and she'll be able to return to it in later life. She'll discover it at some point. I'm confident of that.
Once you stop talking about it, right?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Just coming back to that sidewalks and pedestrians question, we have I live in Stratford upon Avon, and we have various sidewalks that are shared, so that you're allowed to ride on them, and so they're shared with pedestrians. And then we have canal paths. Again, it's shared spaces. So what I try to do is just whenever I'm negotiating, let's call it, around a pedestrian, I'll just say thank you. And I just kind of think, from the comment that we've just heard, if I say thank you to somebody, then that's kind of, it's just a little thing that will hopefully push back a bit about that that idea of all cyclists who just ride on the footpath. But also I assume that not everybody knows that it's a shared space, that I'm allowed to ride on that on the sidewalk, and that's I'm doing something that's perfectly legitimate. So again, I just just thank you, and it's an opportunity to chat with people, isn't it?
Yeah, common courtesy goes a long way. And your shared sidewalk makes me think of our shared paths, our recreational paths, which are just filled with people this year in particular. But they're shared spaces with dog walkers and kids running around and people jogging and middle-aged men in Lycra with their fast bikes, and then just folks who are just out for a cruise. And so it's the shared space that's even more fraught in some ways than our roadways, although we're all out there to have a good time. But I guess we sometimes forget about the thank you and the common courtesy and the communication. We can communicate with those around us. We can use our voice. We can say, hey, passing on your left, or ring a little bell, or slow down. Imagine that. Imagine slowing down to wait until it was safe to pass. What a great idea. We have some additional questions, and no one likes this one. It's about bike theft. So, is something being done about bike theft? I know a lot of people avoid biking because of this issue. Bike theft is a huge issue, as is the lack of safe and convenient parking. Is CycleTO taking these issues on?
I think this has been an ongoing challenge to get political will on. A few years ago, there was a really strong push from Cycle Toronto to sort of follow models that are used out in BC, and I think Ottawa as well, with a particular application that we weren't able to get a lot of progress on. And there was a fairly notorious incident or character in Toronto that was responsible for a lot of bike theft in general. One of the things I would be curious about, just from a data perspective, is if the city is hearing or seeing if there is more bike theft this year. One of the challenges as well that often happens is people not having options about where they can actually keep their bikes. So you might have like this amazing new cycle track between Bloor and Danforth, but you might not be able to keep your if you have an apartment, you might not be able to keep your bike in your apartment or a condo, or you've got a shared locker that isn't very well taken care of. And so it's a really good reminder that when we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about every single piece that kind of gets you from A to B. And we would definitely like to see the city do a much better job around the question of bike theft. And a lot of that will have to do with making sure there are better places to lock your bike, more lockable shelters, doing more work with condo boards to let people bring their bikes in, because it's just, we all know it's just a bicycle. And really, again, just really sort of changing these mindsets. And speaking on the issue of enforcement as well, I think it's another great, I don't want to say opportunity, because I feel that's crass talking in the middle of a pandemic, but I also feel it's a chance to sort of also rethink how we think about enforcement when it comes to bike theft. Given it's, given the amount of money of a bicycle, it's not considered a huge priority for Toronto Police Services. So maybe there are other ways to find people that are more motivated to sort of do this in a way where it's not a police officer coming to your door and potentially scaring you about something, but it's a really more of a community-driven piece. So I think there's some potential there as well.
Thank you. Anybody else have some thoughts on bike theft? Ed.
We go through a lot. We educate people all the time whenever they get a new bike and advise them on how to lock up their bike. And like Michael said, it's true, especially in high-rise communities. There's just nowhere to store a bike. A lot of bikes are stolen from racks or fences. But 90% of the time, what I've observed, there's no data on this, but people don't buy the right locks. Even though we try to advise that, you should really buy more than one lock, and this is how you lock it. A lot of the times they can't afford it, or they buy a cheap lock that is easily to break or it can be cut. So education is really important, and a bike shop or a community group can take the time and say, let's do a workshop on how to lock up bikes, and we do them all the time. We get that question. Other than how to fix a flat tire, we get where do I get a lock, or how do I lock up my lock? What's a good lock? But a good lock would actually deter a pretty most thefts. So if you locked up your bike properly, it would deter most thieves, unless you lock in the same spot every day, overnight kind of thing. So it's it's really important to educate people.
Michael.
I think I just want to add to that, Ed, that's a great point as well. And I think it speaks to sometimes, with all of us here who are all, passionate bicyclists or cyclists or people who ride bikes and have been doing it for years, is you sometimes take for granted all the knowledge you've accumulated year after year. And when you're bringing someone new to, riding a bike, justifying to them, that they've spent maybe a couple $100s on a new bike, and then explaining to them that, yes, this lock that's $50 or $100 to properly lock your bike, explaining that economy of scale can be really challenging. It's like, well, what do you mean? Why is it like a quarter of the cost of my bicycle? And it just speaks to all the challenges that, that it sort of takes to really transform a culture to make it more cycling friendly. And, the importance of, groups, not just Cycle Toronto, but just, also like the Gateway Bike Hub, the type of work that, Dave does as a lawyer, and then through Bike Brigade, and also just bike share in general. Like the more and more people can sort of show just how normal this is and give those tips and tricks, the better all of this will be.
For sure. We only have about 5 minutes left, maybe 3 minutes at this point. Now, Michael Clifford, this may be less of an issue for you, but winter's coming. We've all been dreading it. It's pandemic winter. We would like to stay on our bicycles. This might go to Michael Longfield initially, but we've traditionally had problems in Toronto with clearing our bike infrastructure in any meaningful way. Toronto has generally gone with the wait a minute, it'll melt snow clearing method, which is not terribly effective. Any thoughts on how you think the City of Toronto will do this year, Michael, and maybe Dave Shellnutt, and also Alyssa, I'll throw to you as well. Again, we only have a couple minutes left, but around the advocacy that Bikeshare is doing alongside Cycle Toronto and perhaps others like Dave Shellnutt about winter snow maintenance.
It's definitely a really big priority for us right now, that ensuring it is on the political agenda. Obviously, the City of Toronto is facing a massive budget crunch. but ensuring that bike lanes and cycle tracks, and to be honest, sidewalks.
And
Toronto,
sidewalks. Yeah.
Toronto does a good job of clearing its roads. If you're driving a car, its roads are in pretty good shape. If you're walking or biking, it's not. Winters can be really hard, and especially during this pandemic winter, ensuring that sidewalks and bike lanes are cleared will be really, really essential. Yeah, and I think as well for the success of the Bikeshare program as well. Hopefully, I'm sure it's a priority for them as well as making sure that happens.
Yeah, I can respond quickly. We are a 365-day-a-year program, and part of our operations contract is to make sure that the stations themselves and the bikes are accessible year-round, so that people can get a bicycle out. So our operations team has to follow the same, I guess, bylaws as everyone else in the city, clearing snow within 8 or 24 hours, however the bylaws outline it, which I can't come up with right now. So it's very important that the infrastructure stays accessible, and we work with our partners at transportation services and flag things that come up from our customers when they say, oh, this isn't accessible, or this intersection is a particular issue for us because of the car, I guess, tracks that they leave in the snow. So yeah, it's definitely something on our radar throughout the winter.
Great. Dave?
Yeah, the bike brigade is made up of just regular folks that ride bikes. I mean, bike couriers had to keep their jobs and deliver food to people throughout the pandemic. So we've just got regular folks riding bikes. And we did a poll recently to see who would be willing, if we provided information, on continuing to ride for the bike brigade through the winter. And the number was staggering. It was like 80% of people were like, I'm super keen to keep riding as long as it's safe. So things like keeping the road clear, like if you clear it, they will ride. And we're super excited about that.
That's great to hear. And that makes me one more little note for Michael Longfield. I assume that part of your advocacy does look at working cyclists, in particular in the context of a lockdown winter where people will continue to order, and like, how do we protect those folks?
Again, it's prioritizing to make sure our sidewalks and bike lanes are clear. I think it's it's very easy sometimes to, we hear this from critics sometimes about these new bike lanes that, oh, they're great for 6 months of the year. What are you going to do the rest of the year? Firstly, there actually aren't that many snow days in Toronto, and that's also a huge subtext to this conversation we're having now because of climate change. But also Montreal, for example, has many more kilometers of bike lanes than Toronto, and also has higher year-round cycling rates. And part of it's because they maintain their bike lanes. Looking at things like, rather than Bobcat type vehicles with that push snow, looking at things with brushes as well to clear the snow before it starts accumulating is just really crucial.
That makes a lot of sense. Anyway, I'm a year-round cyclist, so I have my own interest in, having safe spaces to ride. Just a small aside for those who are taking on winter cycling for the first time this year, do practice before you head out on the roads, get used to the snow, start to notice the different types of snow that there are and how your bike behaves in those different types of snow. Slow down a little. And also keep in mind that the north and south sides of the streets, as you're going east and west, the sun position is a little different. So eastbound travel often has little icy patches versus the north side of the street, which has more sun on it, tends to melt a little quicker. So keep that in mind when you're traveling eastbound. It's a weird little anecdote, but it's a thing. Michael Clifford, your film is fantastic. You really picked up my spirits. I want to thank you so much for your film. And it's been such a pleasure to speak with all of you. I think we're going to wrap it up. Any last words, or is the last word mine?
Just on the winter cycling piece, I will let people know that Cycle Toronto will be running workshops, virtual workshops. So you can find them at cycleto.ca, and we should have them up and running starting in November, and just for riding in all weather. Along with the petition to keep the active TO lanes. How long is that petition up? Can you speak to that? Yes, as well. So we mentioned that a lot of the new bike lanes that came in this summer are temporary. So we have a petition if you go to cycleto.ca/keepactiveTO, there's a petition there to, let the elected officials know that these bike lanes matter to you, and you actually want to see them expanded outside the core and into Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough. So we're collecting names. There will be a report back on the city in January, and then a final vote at the end of 2021. So thank you for that.
Thanks, everybody. We'll throw it back to Kim. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you.
Wow, I've learned so much from this session, and we're so lucky to have so many amazing panelists willing to give their Saturday to us here. Thank you to everyone that was participating in this panel and the viewers too. EcoFair Toronto is 100% volunteer driven. So without all of you, this would not happen. So thank you. This discussion was inspired by the film Bicycle from 2014, and we were so lucky to have Michael B. Clifford on this panel. We're also showing it for free until tomorrow, Sunday, November 1st at 11:59, so be sure to check it out. We'll send you along a link in our follow-up email, and there'll be a link in the chat as well. As a part of Active and Healthy Week, we have a number of eco tours we've put together. So be sure to check those out. They're on our website, ecofairtoronto.org. We have an interactive map set up, and these eco tours were very generously given to us by community members, our volunteers, who have knowledge of the neighborhoods they wrote about. So take on one of these tours. We challenge you to. The weather's still great. They can be walked or cycled, and we look forward. And these tours, I should mention, showcase different eco destinations, whether that's a sustainable business, a solar panel, a rain garden, an EV charging station, a Bikeshare Toronto station, perhaps. So all kinds of different features. Highly encourage you to check that out, and they're all free. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. we're hosting a workshop called Cooking for Plants for Health and Happiness. It's going to be a conversation and lesson with the vegan-abler and Mark Monachino from the Toronto Vegetarian Association. So that's at 2 p.m. tomorrow to wrap up Active and Healthy Week. And we'd love to have your feedback. So please take a moment and share your thoughts. A link will be sent with an email follow-up as well as a link on the chat. So we encourage feedback from our volunteers, our presenters, attendees. We're always looking to improve. Don't forget to visit the EcoFair Toronto website, ecofairtoronto.org, for other exciting events, workshops, webinars, another film coming up, as well as the exhibitor showcase, which highlights 40 sustainable businesses and organizations. We've also created 1-minute videos to promote each one of them. So please check it out. We also have family-friendly activities, including climate pledges, and eco fun and games online. So we hope you've enjoyed this event and that you'll join us for our future events this season and seasons to come. Our final week of EcoFair Toronto 2020 is now